All right, hello and welcome again to the Scaling Up Business Podcast. I'm your host, Gazelles business coach Bill Gallagher. We're talking about stories today. I have with us four-time Emmy Award Winning Director and Producer Nick Nanton. He's the author of StorySelling, CEO of Dix and Nanton. He's worked with all kinds of big names and stuff. He'll tell you all about it. We're going to focus in on how to tell your stories well and something that can really make a huge difference in the marketing of your business, both to the customer and to your potential employees. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love Gazelles and everything around it. So, yeah, man, happy to be here. Let's pour some knowledge out.
Well, I first heard you at the Gazelles Business Summit, where we have some fantastic speakers, and you really killed it. And I thought your message was exciting and really relevant. We work with folks all the time on figuring out their story, whether it's their origin story or why they're even staying into it. And that ties well into the purpose of the business and helps to recruit people, helps to find prospects and customers. So this is just a great opportunity. As in preparing for the show, I noticed that there's kind of three big ideas there. One is figuring out your story and being able to tell that well. And I think that's probably where we should start today. And then, of course, the second two pieces are getting others to know your story so well that they could tell it, and ultimately having everybody else around you knowing your story so well that they sell for you. And that story lives as a thing unto itself out in the world and works for you. So that's just a fantastic idea. So it seems like we have to get started. What's your story? How do you get into this business?
Hey, man. Well, cool. Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, so the bottom line is that, so I was born in Barbados. My parents moved to Orlando with myself and my brother and them when I was 1. Grew up in Orlando, started playing guitar at 6. Started songwriting at 16, put out my first record at 18, of which I mentioned to you before. I still have about 800 copies on my parents' bed because
Yes.
I didn't know what I know now and how to market things like that. And
you can share those with your kids as they get older.
Exactly, yeah. We got coasters and Frisbees for life. Because you can use those. The CDs are only good for about those two things now. But they... so I went up to school at the University of Florida. I did my undergrad in finance because that seemed like the responsible thing to do. Finished it up pretty quickly. Then went on to law school because my parents had always encouraged me to get a profession. And my brother went to med school, so he kind of ruined it for both of us. So I had to go there too. But as I mentioned before, I don't practice much law. Certainly don't love the practice of law, but I'm really glad I went to law school because one of the things that is an interesting thing is when you're a lawyer in a room full of lawyers, you're just another lawyer. But when you're the only lawyer in another room of non-lawyers, you have pretty unique talents and skills and gifts.
Yes.
And so when I don't practice law, I'm actually much less of a commodity. So it's an interesting way that it all worked out, and I've enjoyed it. But what happened was I was in law school and I was managing some bands, doing some entertainment things. And I convinced my now partner to partner with me in an entertainment company. And I was producing records. I was writing songs. I still write songs in Nashville. I write a lot of country music, and I was writing and producing other bands. And one of the things that we noticed was even though we were broke college kids, we had to produce things that stood up next to major label content at the time, made videos, all that stuff. And I had to find ways to do it on a budget. And one of the things I remember is we produced this record. The record came out really well. I think we spent $5 or $6 grand on it total, but it sounded like a major label record. We really had done it well. And then we had to create the album artwork. And the problem was in the album artwork, really good photos are hard. They're expensive. They're hard to find. And amateurish photos always look amateurish no matter what you do with them. So we couldn't afford to spend the several $1,000s we needed for the photos. So we came up with an idea, and I said, hey, why don't we do something different? And I ended up having a buddy of mine who's also a broke college student draw cartoons of these guys. And they were like a Blink-182 kind of band. That style of music was called power pop. And so we kind of made this funny album cover called Power Pops. And the three of the guys in the band, they were a 3-piece band. So we made it kind of a play off of Snap, Crackle, and Pop, the guys from Rice Krispies. And we made the whole thing look like a cereal box, and we had fun with it and everything. And we spent like $250. And so we put that out. It went great. And my business partner, Jack, said, Nick, it's intriguing. You probably don't realize it, but you have a unique skill set in creating media that looks like it came out of Hollywood, or, music comes out of Nashville or New York, and you're doing it all on a budget, and you're doing a really good job promoting these guys. But, first of all, when you have like 4 bands you're managing and they've got 4 guys on average, you're like babysitting 16 kids is what it feels like. He said, if you would bring this skill set of what you do to the business world, the things you've learned in entertainment to business, first of all, there's people who are probably more reasonable to deal with, less prima donnas. Not all of them, by the way. Some of them are. Most of them are. And also, you actually might have a budget to work with. So that's what I did. And so we're now 10 years into the business. So I guess that's history. And we've worked with nearly 3,000 clients. We're about to cross over that 3,000 client mark, and we've worked with clients in 36 countries. And I've been, blessed enough to work with people all around the world, whether on large scale events or filming movies. People like Richard Branson and Tony Robbins and Mark Cuban and Brian Tracy and Jack Canfield and Verne Harnish, and just lots of great people. So even Ivanka Trump. I mean, we've had some good times. So that's the long story. That's short. This is a short version of the long story to tell you kind of what got me into doing what I do now.
Yeah, totally get it. And a great pivot into finding something in a place to apply something that you love in a different environment that makes you more unique and more special. So folks come to you, they start to work on crafting their story and making that a centerpiece of something. What's that process like? What do you, or can you tell us a story of working with someone and what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously everyone's story is a little bit different, but what I try to get people to understand is one of the things that either you're taking, well, first of all, most everyone just takes their story for granted. They just think, I'm not that interesting. Why would I talk about that? Well, first of all, there's a bunch of reasons, but if you tell your story well, it will position you as the only person in the world who could possibly solve the problem of your prospect, or that they want to solve it. And because of the fact that your story, when you tell it the right way, it leads down to a natural path of why you are now doing what you do. And so, for instance, we do a lot of things in our agency. We make people best-selling authors. I make documentaries on a lot of people. We put people in major newspapers and magazines. We put them on TV. And there are other places you can go to get these things done. But not the way we do it, and certainly not all under one roof. So we've created, my story of going from entertainment into business positions me very uniquely. Certainly winning 4 Emmys positions me very uniquely. And then people come into our agency and trust us to do all these different things for them. But it only makes sense by telling the story. So, for instance, if I hadn't told you the story of the story I just told you, most people, if you gave the worst intro you could for me, it'd be like, hey guys, me Nick Nanton, he's a lawyer and he's going to help you become a celebrity. It's like, that's weird. So again, a dumb example, but you get the point. It's by telling the story, it's what makes things make sense. And so, I've worked with it's really intriguing actually. Peter Diamandis, I made a movie on him called Visioneer. We won a couple Emmys for it. And it's about Peter's story of the first private space flight, which he did with his nonprofit. X Prize. And then the actual technology was bought by Richard Branson, and most people know now, because they've heard of Virgin Galactic. Well, Peter, when I asked him about telling his story, he basically said, "Oh man, it's been told a bunch of times. I don't really want a fluff piece about myself." And I eventually convinced him I wore him out after a period of time. And then when he saw the movie, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really, really unique. It tells my story in a consistent way, a great way every time." And also what I found was most amazing, I have since then joined the board of the X Prize, and I've been on the board with guys who've known Peter for years, who've given him millions of dollars. And a lot of them didn't even know half the stories he told on the movie. He thought everyone knew him, because if you tell your story 1,000 times, your brain just starts to think everyone has heard it. And you've told a lot of times, but not everybody's heard it. I mean, even when I do sales presentations, or we would do teleseminars, webinars, or I do them at live events sometimes. One time I just got sick of telling my story, so I just thought it'd be a great idea to take it out and save some time and fill it with some more content. And my sales plummeted. And then I put my origin story right back in, and my sales were right back to where they should have been. So that's a direct example of how it affected me. But those are those are just some examples there. And I don't remember if I answered all of your question or not, but.
Well, no, I think it's really great. Immediately reminded me of being a young DJ and just as I was getting started, and I was complaining to a program director about how, like, we're supposed to be a different kind of station, and how can we play the same BS music over and over? Like, good Lord, it's a fine song, but everybody's heard that too many times. And he's like, no, they haven't. You've heard it too many times. You're on the air. You're like totally immersed in this world, but they tune in here and there and they hear the song and they're totally happy to hear that song. I promise you, your frame of reference, your lens, your filter for how much is too much is way off. And you need to just relax and play people what they want to hear.
Yep.
And, it was a good lesson that, the things that we are, we've all heard many songs again and again, and yet people want to hear it. And there's a great song, a great story touches a chord, touches a nerve, expresses something, and it makes us feel something. And even in business, it's helpful to feel something. I think about this all the time because we're focused on, really the beginning of our strategy work and our recruiting work and so much is purpose with companies, right? And they're like, oh, purpose, touchy-feely crap. But some understand it, but many have that kind of reaction to it. And yet in story, we often, in the origin story of the business or how somebody came to it and acquired it, even if they bought it, there's some element of that purpose there that gets people to do the kind of work that they do when they quit. Most people pour more into their weekend and their evening nonprofit work than they do in their daytime job. But when they're connected to purpose and touched by something, and a story can obviously do that, connect to the passion behind it.
It absolutely can. And you think about it, stories are like one of the few things, and I love stories that are told in we'll call it moving pictures for now, but movies and film. I can show you a 90-second story about someone you don't know, or it can even be a fictional character, and I can make you cry within 90 seconds. And it's just that powerful because stories literally move you. There's a chemical in your brain called oxytocin, and that's not the thing Rush Limbaugh got in trouble for. That's OxyContin. That's a different deal. Oxytocin is something your body creates, and when it's a love and bonding hormone.
Yes.
And interestingly, when hearing stories, oxytocin is also released, which creates a chemical trust bond between the storyteller and the listener. So, first of all, you've got chemistry working for you, body chemistry, and then second of all, there's a concept called transportation, and kind of the easiest way to think about it is, when you're reading a good book, let's say a fiction book, and you really kind of stop seeing words on a page, but you see a picture of something that's happening in your mind. You kind of see the movie playing out. Well, that's like you transported yourself into the scenario. And in our world of storytelling, when you tell a good story, you actually can transport your listener or your reader in your business into your story, and they actually start to feel like they were a part of it. They actually kind of start to bond. They feel like they're a part of your success and your trials and your tribulations. So they start to feel somewhat responsible for your success. So to connect that to one more thing, there's a number called Dunbar's number, and Dunbar's number there's debate, but between 100 and 150, and I think nowadays it's probably closer to 150, but basically says you can have 150 relationships at any time, and that's really all your brain can process. Well, if you think about it, it's interesting. If you watch Oprah every day, then one of those 150 spots is taken up by Oprah. Now, I'm sure, your spots 1 through 10 or 1 through 20, I don't know what the numbers are. Your brain knows the difference between, your mom and the level of relationship you have with her and Oprah. But the point being is, it sneaks into repetition also causes it to sneak into your subconscious as a relationship. And I know, some people relate to this when you might have a car dealer in town or a personal injury lawyer in town who's like on TV all the time. And at some point you may have run into him in a grocery store or in a sandwich shop or whatever. And you probably said hey to him like you know him really well. And you stopped and felt dumb afterwards because you really don't know him. They don't know who you are, but you just feel like you know him because you've seen him so many times. Now, what's intriguing about it, if you put all these things together, is if you tell your story effectively and you use different types of media to stay in front of your audience, so you take up one of those relational slots, you really become their friend in the business without, and a lot of times just one-to-many communications. And so when you create that friend in the business relationship with them and they have a chemical bond to you and they feel transported in your story, it's really interesting because they actually will start to feel like I said before, like they're responsible for some of your success. And so they'll never go anywhere else. They'll refer all their friends to you, because if they went to somebody else, they would actually feel like they were tearing down something they subconsciously feel like they helped to build. So it just goes really deep when you tell your story effectively. And, it is absolutely the best way to get any point across, as we've all learned from, Aesop's fables and everything else, for, generations and generations, thousands of years, things that were remembered were told by stories.
So, and I can really hear the disconnect for many entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, stories are important. Stories are great. I listen to great stories. I watch movies. I'm captivated by a good story. Maybe I listen to The Moth or some other kind of thing like that. And yet, what does that really have to do with the nuts and bolts and blocking and tackling of running my business?
Yeah, I think it really all comes down to one very simple thing, and that's trust. If in order for someone to give you their hard-earned money, they got to trust you. It's just the way it is, unless you have them buy some other vice grip, which is never pleasant, right?
Yes.
But yeah, you have to build trust. And so, look, when I tell you my story, and like when I talk from the stage, I just kind of tell people my origin story, and I cover, towards the end, I talk about, I've been through all this, I've been able to meet and hang out with all these people, and most importantly, I've been able to raise a great family. There's my wife, Christina, and there's our 3 kids. And I tell a bunch of different pieces of my story, and we in trust. One of the biggest factors in trusting somebody is essentially affinity. What do you have in common? Like, what do you like that's the same? If and we're not all going to be, none of us are going to be identical for sure, but the more what I call personal hooks you add into something. So I've had people come up to me after I spoke and they really want to talk to me because they love the island of Barbados. That's where I'm from. I've had people come and talk to me because they love the Florida Gators, because I went to the University of Florida. I've had people come talk to me because they're fascinated by Richard Branson or Tony Robbins. And so instantly when you have it's like dating. It's like when you have a connection with somebody, or even like, when you meet a good friend and you just have this connection, is because you have a lot of things in common. Most people's relationships don't last very long or don't ever begin when they have nothing in common. So by telling a story, you're relating pieces of your life and your business to others so that you can see if there's a common ground. And if there's common ground, you're going to get trust points that someone else wouldn't get. And so I think it all comes down to trust.
So we establish trust and a connection with our stories. People develop an emotional bond. And then, as we well know, people make a lot of decisions emotionally, and then they back it up with the kinds of facts. So then they look at your solutions and your price points and your attributes of whatever it is, whether you're product or service kind of business, and they back up their emotional decision with some intellectual rationale. So if I want to begin to develop my story, what do I do? How do I find my story if I don't know it? How do I craft it well? What are the things we need to know there?
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing to do on your own, quite frankly. I think you've got to tell your story just to a lot of people, and you don't have to do it formally, but you can do it in conversation. And, you know the things as you tell your story, the things that make people look like they're snoozing and the things that make people like lean in a little bit. And I think you just got to figure out, how can I tell the story where I begin at a point that makes sense. So like, you don't have to start with, when I was 1 month old, I did this. When I was 2, of course, and you don't give away every first kiss in life. All these things, you don't do that. But, you tell it's relevant. I always say I was born in Barbados. That started when I was born. But it's an interesting factoid for people, like people who are immigrants and have worked hard to build their entrepreneurial, empires. I get an instant trust connection point on that. People who aren't immigrants, let's say, they might still like the island. Think, oh, that's a cool thing. Let's talk about that. Or they've been there, or whatever. Dan Kennedy actually calls those a lot of these things dog whistles. So things that relate to people, they can hear, like they hear, like a dog would hear a dog whistle. But those who aren't interested in that or it doesn't matter to them, it just blows right past them like a human hearing a dog, so you don't hear it. And so a lot of people will be afraid of talking about their past, or like, if they had troubles with alcohol or they were divorced or they were, typically if you explain it the right way, those who haven't experienced that will just think it's part of your story and maybe even an interesting part of your story. And those who have experienced it will have instant empathy for you. Like, oh man, I hear you. I'm glad we can connect on that. So, so you got to find some of these touch points that really make people interested. And you got to weave a story from, beginning, middle, and end. It's a pretty simple thing to do. We've learned story structure, at least subconsciously, our whole life. But what a lot of people tend to do is, there would be something that kind of pains you in your past for some reason. Whether, I don't know, you got made fun of in school, or you filed bankruptcy, or you had a divorce, or whatever. And essentially when they tell their story, a lot of people will just try to hide these things. And what's interesting is, and they're not appropriate in every situation, but I kind of put it this way, everyone has kind of a unique purpose for themselves. And just for like the visual, say, kind of a unique light that you're emanating from you. I'm not going to get woo on you or anything here, but kind of have this unique light. And we have all these things that happen in life that cause us to close off a little bit of ourselves, a little bit of our story. And those are kind of like screen doors. And interestingly, as you go on through life and you start putting those screens up, then less and less of your ability to your authentic self that's really unique and gifted and things shines through to other people. And so as you start telling your story and you start removing some of those screen doors, you'll start to see that people will connect with you much faster. They'll connect with you much more authentically, and it just works. And so, start with what matters. I think, you and I were talking a little bit before this, and I think a great place to start when telling your story is, starting in a moment of crisis or a moment of amazing, an amazing achievement, and then backing up to see where that came from. And then, at the end you can go and say, and here's what, my vision for the future is. Because interestingly, a lot of people also don't ever talk about, where they see things in their industry going in the future, or what their vision is for the future. And what you're subconsciously telling your fans, your clients, your prospects, your listener, your viewer, is that you really don't have any vision for the future. And so you're probably not the one to follow. And so one thing a lot of people forget when telling their story, they're good at telling what happened in the past, but they're not great at forecasting in the future. And you'll find as you do that, there's nothing people are more fascinated by than kind of a prediction of the future. I mean, if you start a conversation right now and you have a knowledge base of, Uber and Google and self-driving cars and what's going to happen when they're here, because you won't even need to own a car because you'll be able to have a car on demand. You really won't need to have any insurance. You'll take things like, if I'm going on a business trip, I might conjure up a self-driving car that has a desk in it or 4 chairs around a table so we can meet. Or we might conjure up, if I'm going on a long trip, I might conjure up a car with a bed in it so I can sleep overnight while it gets me to this destination 12 hours away. And now that's I'm just making an example, but those topics right there are enough for us to have an intriguing conversation for several hours to think about what this really means and leads to. No parking garages anymore. We're probably not going to need them. And so when you are able to talk about things in your industry and have kind of a cast vision that's a few steps or maybe many steps beyond what other people thought about it, it's instant intrigue, and then the questions start coming. So those are a few things I encourage clients to do when telling the stories.
That's really fabulous stuff. So a few things that I heard in there that I think are particularly powerful. So first of all, bring some reality to it, some color, some imagery, and share some actual facts. And I think this is really helpful. People will talk about and they'll report things kind of dryly, like, oh, I have 2 children and I'm married and blah, blah, blah. And that's different than saying, I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son. And my daughter is really, her name's Sophie, and she's super artistic. My son is brilliant at math, and his name's Jack, right? That's very different than I have 2 teenagers. Yes. I'm married. I'm married for 21, almost 22 years to the most amazing woman, Lori. And so we create a picture. You say I'm from Barbados, right? And that's different than saying I grew up on an island that maybe raises more questions, or I was born outside the U.S., raises a question, but you create a picture with something by putting actual names, places, giving a little more richness to it than we often do. Actually sharing something rather than reporting on it. And then the next thing was, and I think bridges beautifully, you talked about starting to have the courage and the capacity to share versus report on things a little bit more. So you're talking about, and you're being able to share things that were maybe difficult, embarrassing, confronting, moments of failure, moments of crisis, and so on, and finding ways to open up a little bit about those. Some of you who know me well know that I'll talk about profound moments of crisis and stuff in front of 1,000 people and just bawl my head off, on stage. And some people are like, oh my God, that's so weird. But most people are left with, that's courageous. That's strong to be able to do that. Not that's weak to cry, but that's strong. So finding an ability to talk about things where you weren't is really authenticity. And authenticity is a big buzzword right now, right? It takes courage. It takes vulnerability to be authentic, but it's very different from being sincere, which is, saying something earnestly or whatever. It's actually being open about what's a moment of difficulty or a challenge or a failing or a weakness or that kind of thing. And that it begins to alter it. It creates humanity and connection and so on. And then you talked about taking people through the story, perhaps grabbing them with something in the beginning, that's one of those moments of crisis, then setting up creating the whole picture of it, and then going through to a view of the future or what the story makes available or points to that's different, and then through the whole thing being able to throw off those limits that come from the decisions or pain points in life, like, oh, I had that happen, so I asked that girl to dance in the 7th grade, and she laughed and snickered with her friends, and so I got very strategic about that, like throwing away those kinds of filters or limitations that we have for dealing with life and starting to get bold and courageous and open up and then be able to speak a future that your company, your business, your service represents, that even goes beyond what you have today, that truly inspires people, captivates people, and engages them in the continuation of a story beyond even where it is now. Yeah?
Absolutely. And it's funny, maybe I don't think I've ever explained, well, I know I haven't explained it this way, but so one of the ways I open up on stage, and every time I speak is, hi, I'm Nick Nanton. I'm actually was born in Barbados, and my family came to Barbados as Welsh pirates in the 1600s. True story. So they're for over 300 years. And it's funny, as I was growing up, we moved to America when I was born, but as I was growing up, my dad kept asking me what I wanted to be, and I kept telling him I wanted to be a pirate. And the funny thing about it is the older I got, the funnier it was to me and the less funny it was to him. But one day he came up to me and said, hey, Nick, I finally know what you're going to be. And I said, what's that, Dad? And he said, a lawyer. That way you can still pillage. Put him through. That's my only bad lawyer joke for the day. But I started with that. It's funny. I've never just explained to people. I don't even think I realized, but as I was thinking, as you were talking, what that does is, first of all, it says the Barbados thing, but it gets it out as non-threatening. It's pretty interesting that, family came there as Welsh pirates in the 1600s. You can see I have a relationship with my dad. That's always a good sign, usually. If you don't have a relationship with your parents, that's another story arc. But okay, he's got his dad, he's got a relationship with his parents. Okay, that's good. And the fact that I make a joke of it, and then I make a joke of lawyers, and I am a lawyer, and people can instantly say, okay, this guy, they might even think I'm funny, but they're saying, okay, this guy doesn't take himself too seriously, and it disarms them to be ready to hear more. And so, just a simple short story like that, gets you far.
Yeah, it's terrific. So, little color, a little bridge your personal things, the reality of things into something beyond, create that connection, tell the story, and start to use it and leverage it. And obviously, as you get good at it over time, it can be quite compelling.
Exactly. Yep.
Brilliant. Well, that's where to get started. The book is StorySelling. The company is Dixon Nanton. We'll have links to everything up in the show notes for the podcast. What there is to do right now is to get started, figuring out what your story is, practicing it, telling it to other people, honing it, figuring out what parts make people laugh and cry and what touch them and what inspire them and so on, and getting bolder and stronger in the whole telling of it. Thanks so much for being on the show and for helping us to begin this process for folks.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. I'm happy to do it, and thank you for a great interview.
Fantastic.